Story That Wrote Itself by A.M. Melfa. Chapter 4. The story was sincerely pissed. No, not the story such as the one Eustace was writing, but the story, which was the prime mover, the big bang of all stories, of which Eustace's little yarn was merely an ancillary projectile. For the first time in its endless existence, the story was positively livid. Writers! What an unimaginative lot of habitual shirkers! Even when they are fed a narrative, perfect morsel by perfect morsel, and on a silver spoon no less, they still cannot muster the willpower to stay on track. The story had simply had enough. Obviously, it was past time to take the matters, all matters in fact, into its own, strictly speaking, non-existent hands. The story, to its friends, story to the rest of us riffraff, had achieved integration on this planet just about the time when hominids began transferring parts of their oral traditions onto cave walls in the form of images. Story's sense of Earth self expanded as language complexities expanded and honed its identity hand in hand with emerging forms of writing, such as the tiny triangular wedges of cuneiform and the bold, upright slash and crotch hatches of runes, or Awam, the tree alphabet. Initially, story pondered in forms that no longer exist, for indeed it encompassed entire worlds of thought and expression that accompanied civilizations arriving on this planet from other worlds, who came here to transplant old stories, as well as genetic markers, into new soil and new life forms. Great expansive sagas that spanned millennia were forgotten by those whose DNA survived the rough tectonic transition of the ages. The entire scope of a multitudinous heritage was lost, folded into the molten batter of this terrestrial sphere in hopes of baking better cake. And yet story survived, its thread inextricably entwined within the helix of all life, and brought forward through the mechanism of genetic memory. This is how the old stories of worlds subsumed were woven back into the garment of time. The fibers may have been of new material in manufacture, but the weft and weave held to the same time-honored traditions of theme and construction. The story embodied the collective consciousness of all tales told across all times that comprise the totality of self-comprehension for all sentient beings. Hominids, unlike other life forms, predominantly learned about themselves, their worlds, and how to successfully navigate their lives through the lessons imparted by the story. Story received a ridiculous boost to its self-identity on April 30th, 1993, when computer scientist Timothy Berners-Lee unleashed the dogs of war, the Holy Grail, the ineffability of being, each descriptor entirely worldview dependent, in the form of the source code for the planet's first web browser. As the world was awakening to the limitless scope of potentiality represented when Berners-Lee uncorked this particular gin's bottle, the story was leagues ahead, already acting master and commander, on board and sallying forth on the seas of zeros and ones. As the World Wide Web grew, exponential powerhouse that it is, Story hitched up a sidecar to that monster engine and came along for the ride. Here was a confluence of timing and opportunity. If the writers of this world were savvy and displayed the proper moxie, the next phase of human existence was shaping up to be a golden age of storytelling. A tipping point was reached when all of the words from all of the live languages and many of the dead ones had been encoded into the monster engine. Now all of the words were available to all of the storytellers at the very tips of their electrified fingers, for human consciousness is in fact a creature of electricity. All the tales within memory of man were here, told in many different ways by many different chroniclers. 99.999% of the information within the realm of human knowing was also to be found here. For the first time in many an epoch, the story was reeling with possibilities. The stage had been set with this gluttonous orgy of information, and now story simply needed to await that synaptic fingertip connection to deliver a whole new multiverse of tales to the writers of the world by electrified osmosis. Easy enough, in theory, but the story had humans to contend with, and humans were proving themselves now more than ever to be an unreliable, entirely indolent lot. It was as if the miraculous inundation of sweet, sweet information had gobsmacked these self-propelled water bags, who were thus so derailed by their own magnificence that they forgot to set the controls for the heart of the sun. Instead of allowing their kind to be buoyed up by this new miracle, this in-your-face supernova, they instead floundered and soon drowned in an endless void of bites. Yes, sincerely, verily, the story was pissed. But of course, it wasn't as if the story hadn't seen the signs. It knew full well from an eternity of experience that humans were completely unreliable. It was something about the complexities of the physical form, especially the brain and the interchange of energies from the planet and the cosmos. Too many opposing forces being brought to bear on these woefully ill-prepared subjects. Not to mention the endless litany of substances these beings introduced into their already ridiculous, elaborate internal environments. Insanity was the perfect word selected by the story to describe this disturbing human penchant for self-destruction. Then there was the psychological landscape to contend with, and what a mired, slippery slope for the offing. And like a cherry on top of the cake, story could not even bring itself to contemplate the elusive wild knot that was the human emotional state. All of these seemingly opposing traits combined to make humans powerfully interesting to the story, who only knew of things like physical sensations, psychological landscapes, or emotional states. Highlighted here were all of the roadblocks that made story's work of imparting itself so very difficult. These details are what made human accounts so compelling, so critically astounding. The story was, as ever, completely and totally divided over the subject of its workforce, the writers of this world. They were stupid frustrating in their penchant for distraction, yet wholly endearing in their ability to constantly surprise. It was this unstable soup of being human that rendered human beings some of the greatest storytellers of all space-time. Take this Eustace Gray by way of example. The story had managed a small miracle when it was able to impart an entire tale to this humanoid, the length of a rather longish novel. It seems that this Eustace was particularly conductive. His electrical field was moist, active, and receptive, which had made the perfect breeding ground for cross-story computer-human interaction. The story was overjoyed at how well and clearly the transmission had been uploaded into the subject writer's brain. Story had locked this Eustace into several extremely productive months of dictation. The best part about the communication was that this Eustace hardly, if ever, interjected his own point of view into the telling. Thus, Story was able to impart a masterpiece with very little annoying editing of the tale's exigent perfection. If only Story could continue to wrangle this Eustace's attention, the Earthling would be declared the greatest writer of his, possibly, all time. But the events of the day had driven Story to the proverbial precipice. For all precipi were proverbial to the story. To begin, This Eustace had overslept due to a particularly robust nocturnal diversion. Okay, story may have, strictly speaking, arranged that diversion, but these adjustments were crucial to the end game. And then he, pronouns were often lost on the story. This Eustace was drawn off course by the projectile eliminations of his pet cat. Stupid felines and canines. In fact, any pets, period. The story was most unappreciative of any sentient being lacking opposable thumbs with which to write. And finally, by all the gods, known and unknown, all unknown as far as the story could ascertain, this Eustace dawdled away massive amounts of productive writing time simply standing in front of a window and staring at a wall. The story was incensed. The story had had enough. And so it was that while Eustace was vacantly musing over the cut of shadow across a brick wall, story hijacked the cursor once again to achieve its superior purpose. The story had decided that this most perfect of tales would be told, come hell, high water, or this, blink, Eustace's blink, sanity, blink. End of chapter 4.